That's enough. Do you think your children will go to a Jewish court? I assure you they will. The other option is a mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames, a very famous statement of the Talmud. There is a commandment to follow the directive of someone who is dying. And there's reason to say that even someone who is not on his deathbed, who's not a shchiv meira, someone who is contemplating, who is thinking about their last moments on earth, even if it's 50 years beforehand, there's a concept of having to follow their directive, no matter what that directive is. So here you have another opportunity. The problem with this, as Rabbeinu Tam suggests, and the Shulchan Aruch codifies, now halacha like Rabbeinu Tam, that in order for the mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames to be viable, it has to go into the hands of a third party. That means that you could set up some type of trust in someone else's name. Right? It can't be in your daughter's name because that's not a third party. In halacha, we don't care what it says on the bill, if it says Bank of America. The fact is, it's her trust. That's not a third party. It would have to be given in name and in reality in the hands of a third party, a non-relative, who every month or whatever it may be, you give money into that trust. Other than that, it doesn't work. And again, we're touching on the surface of its complexities. It is not recommended this as a viable option out of estate planning according to halacha. Other options, before we get to the more famous one, is that of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. On page 455 of his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, he suggests something that is just mind-blowing for its difficulty. He says, well, you know, kibbud avayim perhaps obligates us, honoring our mother and our father, obligates us to split everything equally. We have a halachik obligation based on honoring our parents and having peace at home to listen to what they say. And that is a strong halachik argument, he suggests. What's the problem with that argument? How much money do you think you have to spend for a positive mitzvah? If, let's say, tefillin costs $1 million, do you have to buy tefillin? Anybody?
Sure.
You do?
Yes.
No, you don't. Unless you have $5 million, because the halacha is a chomish. You don't have to give more than 1/5. For a low saseh, you have to give it. For a negative commandment, it's all or nothing.
For better.
For any tefillin.
For anything. It's an aseh. I mean, show me otherwise, but I don't know of a source that says that aseh, you have to give more than a chomish. In fact, I saw a very interesting tshuva. We all know the stitch of Talmud of the rabbi who's giving a lecture and his mother comes and embarrasses him and he doesn't do anything. Tosfos says, don't think that this was a standard case. The mother wasn't well. It seems from Tosfos that she was suffering from Alzheimer's. If the mother was a well person, he could have taken her to Din Torah, as the Yamshel Shlomo had. You're not obligated to give more than 1/5 of either your mind, body, spirit, or money. Now, don't do anything without speaking to a competent halachic authority. We'll speak in a few moments about objectivity and how difficult it is in these circumstances. So for Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky to suggest, and again, remember, Yerusha is instantaneous. Basin can't hold on to the money technically by title. So it's already in my hands. And now Rabbi Kamenetsky is saying I'm obligated to give my sister $1 million because of honor for my parents? I'm not going to give $1 million for a positive commandment. And it's also hard to know, what would my parents want? Is their wishes like they said in their will? I can make the argument that's their wishes. He's making the argument that their wishes are there shouldn't be a fight. But I'll make the argument, no, Rabbi Yaakov is right, and therefore I'm going to bend over backwards to fulfill the wishes of the will. So what do? So the Ramah tells us, Moshe Israel, and dating back hundreds and hundreds of years, for centuries, what Jews have been doing to divide the estate either equally or partially equally is called a shtar chotzi zachar or a shtar zachar shalem. Either one of them is fine. One of them gives the daughters half of that which each son gets. That's what the Ramah mentions. But you see from the Ketzot HaChoshech, very important early authorities who, and the majority of opinions is to give the daughters a full share equal to that of the sons, for various number of reasons. The way it works is as follows. We'll use me as the example, I create a fictitious debt in my will, where I say to the heirs of my estate that you should know that we have an outstanding debt. Now, most debts are an obligation on the heirs, so long as that debt predated my death. That's important, because if the debt was after my death, it's not necessarily an obligation on the heirs. But if the debt predated my death, then it does. So I make this, that's why it has to be, by the way, a fictitious debt, because if it's a true debt, if it's a debt based in fact, it's very problematic, because only after I die. So I say there's a fictitious debt that should go into effect about an hour before I die, and that amount should be more than an entire estate. So let's say the average estate, I have no idea, $500,000, $1 million, so I make the debt for $3 million. Now you have to also be careful. There's a concept in halachik called a smachta. Anybody know what a smachta is? Do you know that gambling, why is gambling so questionable in Jewish law? Because when I bet, in order for an acquisition to be real in Judaism, there has to be a complete or possible forfeit of money. If I truly believe that I'm going to win, I never really gave up the money. I wasn't buying something knowing I was giving up the money. I always assumed I would win it back. That's called a smachta, when it wasn't really real. It wasn't true forfeit. That's why gambling is a question. When you're gambling, no one really wants to give up the money. No one's buying something. They're always hoping to win it back. And so, too, when you have something so big that it's quite obvious they're never going to fulfill this debt, it's not real. So you don't want to make it too big. You want to make it big enough that it's bigger than the estate. And there are other ways of getting into the depth of the matter, how to avoid this smachta issue. So if you have an estate worth $1 million, you say that I have a fictitious, don't say fictitious, I have a debt with your sisters worth $1.5 million. That's it. They lose their entire estate. They have to pay everything to the daughters. However, there's a clause that you say, however, if you divide everything equally, the debt is forgiven. That is a halachically viable way, and it is the way of the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, Agudat Israel of America. They all use some variation of ashtar chati zocher or ashtar zocher sholem to avoid machlokas, to avoid the question of kinley, to avoid a basin versus a secular court. Because again, if you write a halachik will, there's still the possibility of your religious children taking their siblings to a secular court. So you want everything to be acceptable both in the state which you're living in, and that's why I would recommend the Aguda's website, because they go through each state, and you could print out based on the state where you're living in, and halachically viable, to avoid any machlokas. Now, as to Rabbi Lukowski's good question about our Rama subterfuge, and there are many ways in halacha where you find subterfuges is used. Where do you find it? By mechiras chametz, where you know when I sell my chametz to a guy, to a Gentile, that they're not going to use the chametz, and they know that I know, and I know that they know that I know, and so on and so forth. So how is that viable with halacha? We don't have time to get into this. If you recall, I think it was the last Mulava Malka lecture, we talked about Shemitah in Israel today, about selling your produce, selling your land to an Arab. We discussed this issue, and I would recommend Rabbi Zevin Zichron Livracha, his work, Lahor Halacha, where he goes through subterfuge and halacha. Suffice it to say, that's not a problem here. In fact, Moshe Feinstein and various others discuss this very issue, and they suggest as follows. What you should do is, you should set aside a significant portion of the estate to be divided equally. Moshe Feinstein suggests $1,000 for each child. So that means the Bechor will get $2,000, the other boys will get $1,000, and the girls and the spouse will miss out on that. So you'll complete the mission of the Torah, for whatever reason, Ashkafat Torah. Others suggest it should be the Svarim. Others suggest something even smaller. Raphael Cohen, in a correspondence with Rabbi Chaim Jackster from Teaneck, New Jersey, he suggests that you shouldn't do this at all. Because the whole point of this subterfuge is to avoid machlokas, which is very important. That's also a Torah command. Lotus go to do, the chulu, and etc., etc. So he says you shouldn't do anything. But again, there are various rabbis with various opinions. You should speak to your rabbi. This is the reason for the halachic estate. This is to avoid machlokas and to divide everything equally like you want it. That completely shuts the door for any debate and any machlokas, any divisions among our families, however special, however angelic they are, to avoid all problems both in a secular court and in a Jewish court. If you want, as I mentioned, to go onto the websites of rabbis.org or Agudat Israel, where you could download various forms and decide with your competent halachic authority which one is best for you, and to add or subtract as you wish. Okay, now let's move on to the healthcare proxy. There is a vociferous debate today about brain death. So again, we're not going to get into all these topics, but we have to